whoever wins the auction is the legitimate owner of that extension. I can't. It's a good problem.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. You are at workshop 280, the DNS Trust Horizon, Safeguarding Digital Identity. My name is Emily Taylor. I'm the CEO of Oxford Information Labs and a co-founder of the Global Signal Exchange. And we were asked to put together this panel this afternoon for two dynamic coalitions, the Dynamic Coalition on DNS Issues and the Dynamic Coalition on Data and Trust. And thank you to those organisations for asking us to do it. So this workshop will look at the WSIS 20 and the issues of digital trust and identity through the lenses of blockchain identifiers, an emerging namespace, and multi-stakeholder voluntary measures to fight online harms, including scams and fraud. Now, each of these issues requires the domain name system in some way to evolve, to cope with these emerging issues, and each has been a struggle because they're complex in nature and they require the coordination of multiple stakeholders. We will hear from a range of speakers on the issues, and the sessions will be moderated by my good friend and long-term colleague, Keith Drazek, who's Vice President, Policy and Government Relations at VeriSign. So with that, Keith, I hand over to you, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Emily, and welcome everybody to our workshop 280. And as Emily noted, this is a joint workshop proposed by the Dynamic Coalition on DNS Issues and the Dynamic Coalition on Data and Trust. And our view of this session is really, in some ways, the beginning of a multi-stakeholder conversation on two separate issues that Emily touched on. Blockchain identifiers and the need for responsible integration with the DNS, and online harm mitigation up and down and across the stack, with different roles and responsibilities and technical capabilities for the various actors in the stack. Each one of these really does require multi-stakeholder engagement and multi-stakeholder input, and we just want to call that this is sort of the beginning of that part of the conversation. So look for more opportunities in the near future to engage on these issues. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists here. But before I do, I just want to note that as we are here at IGF in a season of looking ahead to the WSIS Plus 20 review, we thought of this workshop in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular SDG number 9, which is to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. And really both of these topics, I think, are tied directly to that. So we wanted to really demonstrate that those at the table, industry and other actors, are really engaged in trying to advance in this IGF context some work around that specific SDG number 9. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. A little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have probably 5 to 7 minutes for each panelist to make some introductory remarks. And then we really do want this to be an interactive dialogue with you in the audience and you online. So we're going to try to keep a good chunk of time at the end here for the dialogue, and then we'll probably save 5 minutes at the end for a little bit of a wrap-up stock taking for the rapporteurs. So, first panelist, and not in order of speaking necessarily, but first on my list is Lucian Taylor. Lucian is a CTO and founder of the Global Signal Exchange, a global clearinghouse for real-time sharing of scam and fraud signals. We also have Hilda Thunum, Managing Director of NORAD, the Norwegian CCTLD registry.no. We're thrilled to be here in Norway, of course. Online, I believe we have Graham Bunton, who's the Executive Director, NetBeacon Institute, an organization established by PIR, the .org registry, that's focused on helping the internet community identify and report DNS abuse, establish best practices, fund DNS research and share data. We also have Benoit Ampeau, Director of Partnerships and Innovation at AFNIC, the French Internet Registry. We have Swapnil Sheth, Senior Director of Research Engineering at VeriSign in the Office of our Chief Technology Officer. And we have Rima Amin, Security Policy Manager, Community Protection with Meta. And Dr. Esther Yaromitsky, UK Department of Science and Innovation and Technology. Esther has a PhD in Internet Governance. She's here speaking in her personal capacity, and we are very, very happy to have each of you. So with that, I'm going to start off, because we have two topics, I'm going to lead off with the first, and that's going to be the topic of blockchain identifiers and the DNS, and probably stop after the three speakers have had their chance to have an intervention, give their remarks, and give an opportunity for questions or audience engagement, participant engagement, before we move on to the next section. But I'll be keeping an eye on the time with the help of Emily. Make sure we keep to our schedule. And with that, let's go ahead and kick it off. So Benoit, I'm going to turn to you first on the topic of blockchain identifiers and the need for responsible integration in the DNS. From your perspective, what are the main challenges to maintaining trust in DNS systems in the face of emerging technologies like blockchain?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Delighted to participate in this session. So, yes, I will talk about the importance of trust in the security of digital identities and the challenges posed by the emergence of the new technologies like blockchain in current Internet naming system, the DNS. It's opening discussion and also concerns. It's a challenging exercise to present this broad, complex topic in such a short time, so I'll do my best. The domain name system, as you know, currently constitutes the reference infrastructure for creating and resolving names on the Internet. It's available to all connected Internet people for more than 40 years. During this time, we can observe some initiatives for alternate naming systems that have emerged on a regular basis. For instance, I can mention Namecoin or even GNU.net, and they are seeking to establish themselves by exploring models other than DNS, but partly inspired by DNS. Today, we observe a significant number of organizations creating and establishing naming systems based on blockchain all over the world. For many years at AFNIC, we have been studying the theme of trust in DNS applied to different use cases and technical environments, and regularly are evaluating other integration of identifier namespace, such as those used in the Internet of Things industry or in the blockchain ecosystem. By studying both risk but also potential complementarities of this identifier system with the DNS. We also conducted a study, publishing a report last year on the possibility of blockchain actually replacing the DNS. And now we are currently evaluating for a future report more technical layer the security level that a blockchain identifier system based on a public blockchain would offer on both registration and also name resolution services. In addition to that, we established with our partners from DNSRF here a roadmap of work on the current ecosystem and blockchain identifier solution providers, from name collisions, provider mappings, and their economic models to ultimately, later this year, develop a general risk assessment framework. So, very quickly, 3 outcomes of our studies. The importance of trust. Trust is essential for the security of digital identities. Without it, users and businesses cannot operate effectively online. Integrating new technologies like blockchain into existing DNS infrastructures presents unique challenges. Blockchain has proven to be very robust in the face of alteration of the data associated with identifiers, but it raises also questions about governance and standardizations. Global consistency and the trust of all stakeholders in DNS have yet to be built for blockchain. Second one, uniqueness of names in DNS and blockchain. These are two different methods to safeguard the uniqueness of names in their naming space. DNS, as you know, relies on hierarchical architecture and a system of delegation, which also provides decentralization, by the way. The uniqueness of names is ensured by a governance system coordinated by ICANN, which supervises the route of DNS through its technical function, IANA, And then registries such as us are managing each TLD, top-level domain, on a delegated basis. The existence of a single root trusted by all ensures that no name can be registered twice in the same naming space is key. In the case of blockchains, the naming space is generally regulated by smart contracts, which defines the rules for registration and realization of blockchain identifiers. In theory, these contracts ensure the uniqueness of all names under a given contract, and several smart contracts can exist on the same blockchain. However, the uniqueness of identifiers is not centrally managed, and at the global level of all blockchains, they are operating independently. Therefore, it's possible for the same identifier to be allocated by more than one blockchain, leading to duplication. The DNS RF study revealed collision between blockchain identifiers and domain names. For example, some TLDs like .wallet and .crypto could pose security issues if adopted without adequate splitting. Sorry about that. That's me. Remember last GTLD round in 2012, printer.com, user.com were used internal DNS suffixes by corporation, and ICANN received the application for .corp, .om, .mail, so forth and so on. So we, with DNSRF, have example of CCTLD and GTLD's collision, sorry. Of the three providers we found had created top-level identifiers that were the same as existing GTLDs. One with 8 direct conflicts, the second one with 4, and the last one with 1. On the CCTLD level, we also had collision with existing CCTLDs and even 2 other TLDs with 2 later top-level identifiers not delegated by ICANN. So our work with DNSRF aims to give a concrete view of the situation to better evaluate and provide a risk assessment framework for other concerned stakeholders, which is important here, institutions, policymakers, for their own purpose. As a conclusion, in a nutshell, maintaining trust in DNS is crucial for digital identities, DNS identities and other digital identities that are relying at some point on DNS. The integration of blockchain within the DNS could present opportunities, but also significant challenges that could alter this trust. Proliferation of blockchain identifier systems makes them prone to confusion when resolving names. Finally, stakeholders' involvement is essential to overcome these difficulties and understand the potential benefits, but also, very importantly, the risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benoit. And I just want to reinforce one of the things that you mentioned, and that is the importance of the fundamental foundation and the importance of the single authoritative root in dealing with matters in the DNS. That one of the challenges and one of the concerns that you've correctly flagged is the potential for duplication of records when there should be a single record. And so I think this is important both in today's context, but also looking ahead to the upcoming launch of a next round of new GTLDs in the ICANN space. There's currently an application window that's targeted for April of next year, with likely delegation of some of those strings applied for, perhaps a year after that. So this is a live and active topic when we're talking about potential implications, both at the technical and the policy level, when it comes to expectations around these unique identifiers. So with that, let me turn to Swapnil.
Hey, thanks, Keith, and thanks for the opportunity for me to be on this stage, part of this conversation. So, yeah, domain names, as we know, have been part of, have been long users identifiers, right? In applications, going back all the way, you can think about Telnet, FTP servers, email services, and then later web domain names were adapted to be used for the web use case. So what we've seen, though, in the past few years is that there is interest, and blockchain applications and decentralized applications have emerged as a new use case for user-friendly identifiers. So as an example, blockchain wallets. We've all heard of blockchain wallets by now. And so blockchain wallets tend to identify users via a long alphanumeric string, which is human unfriendly, much like IP addresses are unfriendly. And so obviously there is a need for users to be able to use something that's human friendly so that they can make their interactions with these blockchain applications easier. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have seen dozens upon dozens of these alternative namespaces in blockchains. Exactly for this use case, which is trying to make interactions much easier with these blockchain applications. What we are also seeing is there's a lot of interest in using DNS domain names for these use cases in blockchains. Sorry, I just... Yeah, so there's a lot of interest for using DNS domain names in blockchains. And this chain of thought, or this line of thought, where you can use a DNS domain name, integrate that with a blockchain application, we call that as a DNS integration. So imagine when you're trying to send cryptocurrency, right? You can use a domain name which you're familiar with, as opposed to using this long alphanumeric blockchain address. Now, the thing is, DNS integrations come with their own set of challenges. For example, how do we think about a domain name that's transferred or expires after the domain name has been integrated into the blockchain application? How do we avoid risks, right, with inconsistencies, with the security concerns that come along when the same names are used across multiple systems? These are really important topics, and without coordination, these systems will fall out of sync. And when they fall out of sync, they will give rise to unexpected user behavior, inconsistent behavior. And more importantly, these issues will lose or undermine trust that we have built in DNS over the last several decades. So don't get me wrong, though. Ultimately, I think blockchain-based DNS integrations have the potential to enhance the value of DNS domain names. But we believe that the way to get there is via responsible DNS integrations. So we can take the well-established benefits of DNS and extend that to these new use cases in blockchains. So safeguarding the stability, security, and reliability of critical internet infrastructure has been at the very core of what Verisign does. And alongside keeping the same values in mind, we're also supporting development of responsible DNS integrations. So what have we been doing? We have published a variety of research papers and measurement studies to raise awareness of SSR issues that exist in today's DNS integrations. We are actually actively working with the community and encouraging the community to come up with standards and best practices for responsible DNS integrations. I think this is where I see a great opportunity for collaboration. The DNS, along with this long-standing community in ICANN and IGF, have proven to be resilient and adaptable, right? DNS has well-defined standards and practices for transparency, for control, and for domain name lifecycle management. And I think together these principles can inform and should inform how we build and develop these new integrations with DNS. So now, the internet's success has been rooted in interoperability, trust, and collective ownership. And as we evolve the DNS to these new use cases, as we innovate, we must preserve these values. So here's my invitation. Let's work together. Let's collaborate together so that we can use the existing critical DNS infrastructure for these new use cases. But let's do so in a manner that supports our collective goals, which is to build a safe, secure, and reliable internet ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Swapnil. So I'll turn next to Esther, but I just want to remind everybody that when Esther's concluding her remarks, we'll turn to the audience, turn to you for any questions and comments and input that you may have on this particular topic. And of course, our panelists are more than welcome to engage together and compare notes in any conversation that they'd like to have. So thank you. Esther, we've heard about various national approaches to digital identity and online safety. From the UK's Online Safety Act to emerging blockchain systems. As AI transforms both the challenges and the potential solutions, what do you think needs to happen at the global level to address the trust and security challenges? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Keith. I really believe that the choices we will make in the next 2 years will determine a lot of whether the internet will remain a stable and trustworthy source or whether it will become a great vulnerability for us. I will explain why in my remarks. Before I begin, just to reiterate, this is not UK government policy, and it is based on my research on AI, but also institutional governance. I think that when Tim Berners-Lee created the World Wide Web, he was probably not expecting how much of our global e-commerce system and our economy would depend on the structures and the protocols that we have in place today. The internet is the backbone for 5.4 billion internet users, which is an incredible number that we hope will grow and reach everyone that hasn't been connected yet. Living in this type of environment also presents a lot of risks and challenges. I know that we will move to the topic of fraud after this, but I just wanted to highlight how important it is that we maintain a secure DNS system. As in the United Kingdom alone, fraud accounts for 40% of all crime, and 80% of that is cyber. So while all of this is intensifying and we have a lot of issues of fraud in the current DNS system, new naming systems that we are discussing today are emerging in parallel, and this is developing their own logic, standards, and their own risks. ICANN, which we respect and love to be the important body that is keeping the internet stable and interoperable, acknowledges that blockchain naming systems are being built outside of the global domain name system. Actually, I just wanted to give you a number that this market has now grown to $360 million today. There is information and lots of talk about Web3 groups preparing to apply to the next round of GTLDs at ICANN in 2026. And so this is a really good time to discuss these challenges. So the critical choice I want to highlight is that we need to answer the question, and my co-panelists have addressed it, do we integrate this blockchain system into the existing DNS and see it as a security layer to the system that we have today? Or do we watch our infrastructure fragment in dangerous ways in which fraud will likely just intensify? And the question that we're facing today is definitely not whether these systems will emerge and whether this threat will exist, because it already does, and it will. And I think we've already moved past that question absolutely. And I am proposing very much a multi-stakeholder approach to really tackling this. We need new initiatives led by different stakeholders like VeriSign to create global trust infrastructure that integrates these two systems. Some of the things that I'm thinking about is also connecting it to some of the GDC and WSIS and SDG lines that we have. So under the GDC principle 2, it would be very, very smart to integrate cryptographic identity into DNS queries. So for example, when you visit lloyds.co.uk, you would also have a mathematical proof that this domain is authentic, and that would add an additional layer to what you are accessing. GDC principles 3, 4, and 5 would also enable federated AI systems to detect fraud in real time on top of the structures that we have today. And how does this work? Well, we know that blockchain identifiers, they create really tamper-proof digital certificates that ensure that the website you're on is actually legitimate. And that is something that adds a layer that demonstrates that the DNS is not forged. So this is a great opportunity to combine these two approaches. This would strengthen actually the root principle that maintains today's internet stability and universal connectivity. And that's why it's important that ICANN pays attention to this now and really leverages the next round to ensure that this is integrated before entities are established outside of the GTLD program. Integrating AI infrastructure would also enhance rather than replace the DNS system. So we need to think of solutions as also in post-quantum solution thinking processes that integrate AI into managing fake websites much quicker, detecting and signifying that there is a form of domain hijacking taking place. So without going too much into detail, what my point is that we are not going to succeed if we try to replace the DNS. It will be really bad for the internet. We need to integrate any new technology and innovation into the system we have today. And to conclude, being a multi-stakeholder process is the only way forward. No government, no private entity, no civil society group can solve this alone. This needs to be done within the forums that we have today, especially within the ICANN, the GAC. It needs to be actively involved to make sure that the next round is successful and integrates these really important thoughts that we are discussing today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think this is a really important point to say. Innovation needs to be supported and encouraged, but it needs to be done in a responsible way. So I think each of our speakers so far has really reinforced that issue. Esther, I really appreciate your focusing this on the need for the multi-stakeholder engagement around this topic. I think that's critical, and certainly one of the reasons that we're here today at IGF bringing this to the community's attention. So with that, let me ask if there's anybody who would like to come to the microphone or to get, actually there's one on each side, or to get in queue. Checking to see if we have anybody online. And you know, I would say we have 5 or 10 minutes to discuss this topic before moving on if we'd like to, or we could move directly into the online harms discussion and then come back for questions and comments at the end. Edmund, go right ahead. Hello, welcome.
Edmund Chung here from .Asia. Just wanted to pick up on the integrating like blockchain and some of the emerging technologies to how we manage the DNS. Two things I want to highlight. And one is I thought the question about including cryptographic technologies to the resolution process is quite interesting. I just wonder, currently the DNSSEC protocol, the DNS security extensions do that. I'm just curious how blockchain would add to the DNSSEC part. The other thing that came to mind is that what about the registration data? I actually personally find the registration data to be quite useful. I mean, blockchain might actually be very useful for registration data, especially for you know, like domain transfers, ownership transfers, and authentication of those issues because of the nature of blockchain. See if there are any thoughts on those two things.
Thank you so much for your question. And definitely DNSSEC, very good that you brought it up, and thank you. I wanted to get into that as well. It's true that it already provides some form of validations in the DNS responses to prevent that tampering. But this blockchain enhancement really just builds on top of that, I would say. So it would exist as a form of secondary security layer on top of the DNSSEC. And that would be similarly to what would happen when we need to develop quantum-resistant data defense processes.
Yes, I would just add that DNS is secure today. DNS domain names are portable, they're flexible, and they're secure. Security is provided by DNSSEC as a means of authentication, and otherwise email and web traffic are supported via the encrypted protocols, right? So I think I want to reinstate that DNS is secure today, as is.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Edmund, thank you for that question. We have another speaker. If you could identify yourself, please, and then go ahead and ask your question.
Yep, hi there. Thank you. My name is Andrew Campling. I'm from a consultancy, 419 Consultancy, which, amongst other things, spends time thinking about the DNS. I'd echo the comments about DNSSEC. I'm sceptical that there will be value add on that specific point, doing two lots of the same thing. I think, particularly when I know there's post-quantum being tested to extend DNSSEC anyway. And we have to think about the compute cost, the environmental cost of doing that twice. So I think we should be cautious heading in that direction. The point I wanted to make, though, some of the let's call them the Web3 naming schemes have as a feature of their creation that they have no governance. So as some of the ones that don't have it as a feature have fairly immature governance, not by design, just because they're still very early in their evolution. And I think there's a lot of very useful lessons that could be carried across from the the approach to governance in the DNS into those systems. There would be benefit from integration, at least at the governance level, if not at the technical level. I don't know if any panelists want to comment on the governance points.
So I don't know if you've been following DNSOP working group in IETF, and so we have a couple of drafts that we're working on towards responsible DNS integration, and one of the ones was recently, as of early this week, was adopted by the working group. And it talks about what are the considerations for integrating DNS domain names into blockchain namespaces or blockchain applications in a responsible manner. So it's sort of a checklist of things to go through as you're building your integration, and hopefully by the end of it, you will have a responsible integration, and that will obviously have the governance of the DNS because it's rooted into the DNS. I can manage DNS root, if that helps answer your question. Yeah, and then going back, just a plug-in here since you brought up post-quantum DNSSEC. If you are interested in that topic, we are actively working on it. We will have hackathons, and we'll also have a PQ DNSSEC side meeting at the upcoming IETF meeting. So please join us and feel free to contribute.
If I may, a side comment. So, linked to the question. Fully agree with what you said, but from the blockchain provider solution perspective, we do not know yet if they would like to engage in this way, in the responsible integration. So basically, we know internet, it's complex. We all know this. Providing consistent user experience for a stable, resilient, secure internet, it's complex. So we'll see what the future will be by integrating this kind of factors into the DNS ecosystem at large.
I'll make another point while we're on the topic is the interest from Web3 community. So the draft I just talked about, I have co-authors from ENS, which is a alternative namespace in the blockchain, Ethereum name service, and another co-author is Blue Sky, which is a decentralized social media namespace that's trying to use DNS domain names as social media handles. So I just want to say that there is enough interest from the Web3 community to integrate responsibly, as long as we are willing to work with them. So.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, again, to emphasize that this is important to think about now, because now ICANN has an opportunity to seriously engage with, as I mentioned earlier, it is a growing industry, there is interest, but it's our responsibility coming from kind of the ICANN and traditional DNS system to engage, and that's also within our hands.
So, thank you very much. And Andrew, thank you for the question and the engagement. We have 2 quick questions, I think, in the chat that Emily will read, and then we'll probably pivot and move on to the online harms discussion, and we can always come back to this at the end. So, Emily.
Yeah, so we had a comment from Luke Siffer saying, okay, I'll sum it up. It's not that complex. The entire Web345 blockchain saga is merely a creatively lazy attempt to monetize the internet by fragmenting DNS with an alternative route. Nothing revolutionary here, just reheated hype. Time to move along. Bevan Wathan did a thumbs up and agree to Esther's call for integration and not replacement of the DNS. And Carolina from Oxhill, hello Carolina, asked 2 questions. How do we ensure responsible integration happens in a multi-stakeholder manner? And also, how to get the blockchain community to participate? What incentives exist for them to participate? I think a lot of those, the second question you touched on in the just the recent remarks. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Emily. And I think to Carolina's question about, what are the opportunities for engagement? I think the dynamic coalitions that are represented here, I think are future opportunities for continued engagement in a multi-stakeholder way on this conversation, but probably not the only options. So we should be creative and think about how to reach out and engage folks from this particular community, but also other multi-stakeholder actors and perspectives to make sure that we have a well-informed and broad sort of understanding of the various concerns and opportunities. So thank you for that. We will now pivot and move on to our discussion on online harm mitigation. I'll just take a couple of minutes to give some context and maybe frame the discussion. Over the last 5-10 years in the ICANN community, there's been a lot of discussion about DNS abuse and the need for enhanced tools for compliance at ICANN to be able to deal with the so-called bad actors. A couple of years ago, the GTLD registries and registrars in the ICANN space voluntarily took on new contractual obligations enforceable by ICANN's compliance team to act to mitigate DNS abuse when it's identified within our zones. And that term DNS abuse is phishing, farming, malware, botnet, command and control distribution, and spam when spam is used as a delivery mechanism for those other 4. Obviously, that is just a subset of the broader topic of online harms, right? So that's DNS technical abuse. There's obviously other online harms that are related to content, and there are a number of different actors in the internet infrastructure stack that have different roles and capabilities and technical capabilities to mitigate abuse at the most appropriate time, the most appropriate level, without disproportionate impact on other actors in the system. So I think what we're going to talk about today is the broad topic of online harms. And with that, I'm going to turn first to Hilda. Hilda, a question for you. The Norwegian top-level domain .no is an example of a TLD with low rates of domains being used for abuse like phishing, malware, and spam. Could you share some insights from your perspective into what could be the reasons, or what could be the reasons behind that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me here on the panel. I'd like to start by saying that just like in the offline world, I think online abuse rates are a reflection of many different societal factors. So even though I work at the registry, it's not all the DNS that does this. But I do think that the Norwegian model and the Norwegian approach to the .no domain name provides one example of how many different stakeholders can work together and have a positive effect. So all domain registries, people like me that hand out domain names, we operate within an ecosystem of the local law where we're based and the registration policy. And one of the factors that influence the type of neighborhood that sort of grows under a top-level domain is the requirements that the registry imposes on those wanting to register domain names. So the registration policy for NO is shaped by NORID, but we do this in consultation with different stakeholders in the Norwegian society and within the domain regulation that provides a sort of framework for the basic principle of this. And one of the requirements we have is that anyone who wants to register a .no domain name must identify themselves by providing either the organization number registered in the Norwegian Register for Business Enterprises, and foreign companies can do this if they have a Norwegian subsidiary, or as an individual to have a national identity number registered in the National Population Register. So if you've worked in Norway for a long time, you get one of these. And before granting the right of use to a domain to anyone, we verify that they exist in one of these official registers. So we look it up. And this ensures that each NO domain name is registered to a real individual or organization who is responsible for how the domain is used. So, sad to say, and I hope I'm not breaching any childhood dreams here, but Santa Claus does not have a .no domain name because he does not exist. But of course, this is not only a sort of registry-only effort, because we don't talk to the domain holders directly. So it's the registrars who have the direct contact with their customers that are required to know who they are and to sort of ensure that the one contacting them actually represents the organization that they are trying to register a domain for. But how they do this is left to the registrars, because that varies wildly if you're a small registrar that knows every customer personally, or you're a large registrar with different control systems. And then we also have a very, I think, fairly unique Norwegian rule that there is a limit to how many domain names each domain holder can have. So if you're an individual, you get up to 5 domain names, and if you're a company, you get up to 100. And the rationale behind this is that domain names are a limited resource, or good domain names are that. And sort of in the Norwegian way of, there must be some cake left on the table for the latecomers. We want to keep some domains still there so that early ones, adopters don't get to take them all. So both of these requirements are there for other reasons than fighting online harm. But they have the happy side effect that they irritate the scammers a lot. Because first of all, they, as someone wanting to register a domain to use it for illegal content, for scams, for spam, they have to either identify themselves or steal somebody else's credentials. And when they do, they sneak past the registrar's control mechanism, they get only 100 domain names, or 5 if they stole somebody's personal credentials. And that's kind of friction for those that needs to burn through a lot of domain names in order to spread their scams. At the same time, the whole point of making it slightly difficult for the criminals is also not to create too big a burden on the legitimate domain holders. Because we want people to have domain names. We want them to have their little corner of the internet where they have ownership of the content they produce, instead of just being at the online large technical social media platforms. And so this makes NO a fairly safe space. But of course, there are Norwegian criminals, and there are other criminals that steal credentials. So in the cases that domain names are used to commit a crime, then the rest of the regulatory ecosystem comes into play. So the Supreme Court in Norway established as early as 2009 a principle that it's the domain holder that holds the responsibility for the use of the domain name. And since that is actually a real person or an organization, there is a place to start if one wants to take action. And this year, the revised Electronic Communication Act provided further clarity by putting this principle into law. So as a last resort, when proportionate, action may be taken against the domain name. But such measures requires a process that safeguards the legal rights of all the involved parties. And this is especially important because for top-level domains like .no with the presence requirements, almost all of the domains that are used for the technical online harms like phishing are compromised domains. So the domain holder is a victim that has his website or has his domain compromised and not necessarily the perpetrator. But in those rare cases where a domain name needs to be taken down instead of the content acted upon, Norwegian police have a clear mandate in law to seize domain names, similarly to what they can do in the offline world, where they can seize a car or a gun or a dog if it has bitten someone, and to keep as part of a case that's raised. And just like in the offline world, also in the online world, when they seize a domain name, they have to follow the requirements for due process. And the Consumer Protection Agency have the same sort of power to go and require a domain name to either be deleted or transferred in the cases that it's serious online harm to consumers as a whole. But in those cases, they have to go to court just to prove that they have tried less impactful actions first. So, in summary, I think it's the combined effort of the registry and the registrars as part of the registration process, and then the regulatory framework and the public authorities both providing official databases we can use, but also acting when illegal content or other online harm is being a problem.
Okay. Thank you very much, Hilda. And I want to just touch on a point that you raised, and that's the important distinction between domain names that have been registered with malicious intent or for the explicit purpose of perpetrating fraud or crimes or online harms, and compromised websites or compromised web hosts. And I think you also noted that there could be an instance where a domain name that was registered with perfectly legitimate intent had an account compromised. So it actually could be, there's sort of a range of possibilities there in terms of, the use of the domain name. But I think you also reinforced an important point that depending on the nature of the harm or the nature of the abuse, there could be action that's appropriate at the registry level or the registrar level or in combination somehow. Or there's the need to engage the content layer of the infrastructure stack to make sure that the web hosts, the CDNs, are also involved in instances where a website's been compromised, because they're the only actors that can take the surgical act needed to be able to address that particular bit of harm. And so proportionality is important in all of that, but thank you for all of that. Thank you, Hilda. Okay, I'm going to turn to Lucian next. Lucian, on day 0, we had there was a great session. I recommend it to everybody on online fraud and scams. And so we heard in that session from you about the Global Signal Exchange, your new initiative to address a number of challenges in tackling scams and fraud. So curious what you'd like to share on that and how it's different from any other initiatives. So, Lucian, thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith. I just wanted to say, I think we're going to do our little speeches and then there'll be questions after that if you want to take a rest. Okay, thank you very much. Keith, thank you for that. And 3 short answers, and then I'll extemporize. The first one is that we didn't just dream up the idea at the GSE ourselves of sort of building a global signal exchange. A number of organizations came together in a multi-stakeholder community and asked for that organization to be created. In other words, that it was missing in the current fight against scams and fraud. And so how are we different? Well, we seek to change the game in the effort to tackle scams and fraud. And finally, in the answer to the it's a point that I generally want to say. We're here at the IGF, and we really think that this is the ideal sort of space, this multi-stakeholder environment, to discuss these sorts of things. But I've also been hearing about the Internet Infrastructure Forum and others, where these are safe places which are less polemic, where we can actually come together and figure out how to solve this without kind of getting into a circular firing squad. So to dig in, my first point, the creation of a new data signal sharing entity. The need for a cross-sectorial international signal sharing platform was identified in the Global Anti-Scam Summit in Lisbon in 2023. And the GSE brings together a number of partners to deliver a new service to fight scams and fraud. Currently, we've got 160 organizations in the accreditation pipeline, so there is a strict accreditation process. We've got the commitment from 4 big tech, including Meta, thank you, Rima, and we've got a huge new opening, proprietary threat intelligence from Google, which is they're opening up their own threat intelligence to this new idea, this new venture, and trying to less depend on these sort of lots of threat signal bilaterals and have a single service to go through as a kind of broker. We're in negotiations with several government and law enforcement bodies. So how are we changing the game? Cybercrime is rising relentlessly. I don't think any of us can argue with that, really, seriously. I've asked my family to look at their phones and give me some WhatsApp examples, and they've just got dozens of, you've got to pay a fine, you've got to pay for, you've got a new a bill from some car park or some tax office. We're under this relentless pressure all the time to reevaluate the things that we're being presented with. There are a number of initiatives across the internet supply chain verticals, we call them verticals, that are doing good things, but cybercrime, the vector is still increasing. When I talk about the internet supply chain, I talk about the supply chain that's available to scammers and fraudsters. That is building their infrastructure. A fraudster will build a domain name, identity, register a company, build a website, benefit from content delivery networks, and so on. They will then establish false IDs on social media channels and on email and others. They will then easily engage with the potential victims through chat, through email, through messaging services. And finally, step 4, I call it, a banking commitment is made, a crime is registered, and at that point we know we're dealing with a criminal, and then they package those fraud services and recycle them and make them available and actually provide a fraud and scamming industry for others to enjoy. So the criminals are moving faster than us. They're exploiting cross-border legislative tensions and sharing bad things between each other better than we share things. So the GSE aims to deliver new things. First of all, face up to the governance and policy challenges, and they are considerable. We've been talking about them in ICANN and IGF for decades now. And secondly, address the technical challenges. Now, in terms of the governance and policy challenges, we are tackling head-on the cross-border, international and cross-sectorial challenges, and we've hired good lawyers, and I'm not going to even bother to talk about all of that today. Thank you very much, Emily. In terms of the technical challenges, I'll get back into my comfort zone. We've invented our own acronym called Quick Factors, QIQ. You can't invent a new organization without some new acronyms. First, those quick factors are quantity, immediacy, and quality. In terms of quantity, have we got enough data to reflect the actual problem, to reflect the problem that consumers are suffering? In January, we had 40 million threat signals. Let me put that into context. The Action Fraud, City of London Police, they're getting 30,000 threat signals every month. We've risen from 40 million threat signals through the Google stack up to 270 million threat signals. They're rising by 1 million threat signals a day. And we still believe we're not seeing half of it. Hopefully when Meta and more come on board and start supplying those signals, we're going to start to see really what the consumer is suffering from. We want those more signals to be provided for the participating organizations, and we call this uplift. Uplift is when all parties share signals and thereby find new information for themselves over and above their own stocks of threat intelligence. We observe uplift. We also want to reduce the cost of signals for the smaller players. immediacy. We need to make things quicker and reduce the time to live for scams and fraud online. The time between a signal reported and a signal being mitigated needs to be brought down from an average of 4 days between detection and mitigation. Esther mentioned, the need for federated models and, quantum, big computing power and AI to move towards real-time threat detection, to identify these clusters as they're happening. Finally, quality. To tackle both the quality of the signal and the provider, these are impacted by two things: confidence scores and feedback. So a signal provider can attach their own confidence score to a signal, and this can be improved by what we call overlap. When all parties share signals and simultaneously detect the same signal, we increase confidence. And the second big part of our work is to develop a feedback loop. This is a concept that came from cybernetics. It's something that I employed in 2023 and started talking about because it's missing in the game. And the feedback loop is an enormously challenging bit of work. You can't just provide feedback to threat intelligence signals, which are low quality kind of neighborhood watch type things. These are not evidence-based pieces of data that will stand up in court. So the signals are absolutely essential. I'm running out of time, so I'll just summarize. We have a number of pilots with registries, registrars, advertising communities, big tech doing handshakes, and police and law enforcement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucian. And I think what you've described is a clear need for an intermediary and aggregator of data, a clearinghouse platform of data sharing between threat reports, threat intelligence, reporters of abuse, and the operators of infrastructure that have the capability to address that abuse, right? So thank you very much. Just time check, we've got 18 minutes left. We have 2 panelists yet to speak, and I'm going to try to keep a few minutes, 5 minutes at the end for any questions and engagement from you. So Rima, if I could turn it over to you. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So I'll start by saying that our team in security policy work to counter adversarial threats in a number of different areas. So that tends to cover influence operations, cyber espionage, hacking, and frauds and scams. And throughout all of those different areas, the evidence shows that DNS abuse accelerates the harm to people and businesses across the board. Our teams are really focused on working to prevent, mitigate, and stay ahead of these threat actors that are looking to abuse sort of Meta's platforms and violate our policies by redirecting users off over to malicious off-platform links. But I think, as everyone has kind of said here today, that this is a internet ecosystem problem, so we need to really have that sort of multi-stakeholder approach to be able to responsibly manage and mitigate some of these DNS abuses. Just to touch on a couple of the sort of the key areas that we're concerned about and that we see. So the first sort of being domain spoofing, where domain names are created closely to resemble legitimate ones in order to deceive the people using our platforms. We also see them being used to sort of phish people online and sort of steal sort of their credentials. The second area relates to sort of cyber squatting and domain impersonation of things like businesses and sort of well-known brands, again, created to lure people into thinking they're into a safe space that they sort of know, and sort of commit harms towards those people. The third is relating to deceptive sort of redirects. So adversarial actors may attempt to route users to malicious websites by making them think that they're visiting a legitimate one, and then they get thrown over to a harmful website, potentially with sort of malware and other harmful things. One emerging area that we are seeing is the use of link aggregators and shorteners. So we're seeing threat actors really sort of leverage those in order to sort of evade URL impersonation that might be sort of easier to detect. So that's one sort of area that is emerging. Just to dive a little bit more into the frauds and scams space and how the DNS abuse sort of proliferates there, there's a number of different areas. I'll start with the account side. So if you are a fraudster, you're most likely to use a fake account or a compromised account. Compromised accounts are particularly lucrative because they have legitimacy and sort of history behind them. And those accounts may also be used to sort of manage sort of different business profiles, etc. So we see them very often sort of targeted, and the way in which they might try to gain access to that account is, again, through sort of malicious links, which would sort of install malware and steal credentials and a bunch of other different things there. Once identities are created, to sort of Lucian's point earlier, the actor will try to engage with their victim. Now, that could be sort of through a post, an ad, a message, or whatnot. Then the victim is often taken over to a website. Now, that website might be sort of impersonating a particular shop. They try to buy a product. They no longer receive a product. They try to go back to the website. They don't get any recourse, and then they go over to the banks. And so this sort of journey is particularly challenging. We can do sort of what we can to, once we understand that link is sort of malicious, take that down off a platform and make sure it doesn't reemerge. But to Lucian's point about how long they stay on the internet, they still continue and continue to exist sort of on other platforms and cause harm. A couple of things that we've been doing also to protect the misuse of sort of Meta's brand. We have been able to have some success in being able to take down some of these domains. So in 2024 last year, we were able to take 15,000 URLs that came from sort of Vietnam. We've also been able to take down 9,000 URLs that were impersonating sort of WhatsApp, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Threads, and Reality Labs. So we are able to take some action, but we do think more is needed. To go back to the point about these websites existing on the internet, we take efforts to share the intelligence and signals that we have. So we do that through sort of existing signal sharing programs that we have with industry. And we also think GSE has a lot of potential, especially because it's not just industry focused, but because there's sort of cross-sector sharing that is happening there. In terms of sort of moving forward here, a couple of things that we think would be really helpful. I think the first is having sort of global solutions. We've seen some really good sort of practice here today, and I think bringing those into sort of global context would be helpful because of the nature of sort of the internet. We see a lot of countries trying to tackle this sort of in their own way, and so if there was a consistent approach, we think that would be incredibly helpful. We also sort of advocate for sort of transparency and accountability policies to navigate DNS abuse, including sort of areas to help with authentic engagement online. The sort of a remediation side, so making sure that abuse is mitigated sort of as promptly as possible. And we also support the whole of sort of community cooperation here, because we do understand that it is a complex problem. We all only see different parts of it, and so we actually just need to be pulling these pieces together.
Okay, thank you very much, Rima. I think that last point is really critical, and that's collaboration, cooperation, information sharing up and down and across the stack, and also to both of your points about the need for cross-sector engagement. For example, the financial processing transactions industry, they have information that would be very helpful to other parts of the internet stack. That's just one example, so thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Graham, I'm going to turn to you next, and then we'll probably try to keep 5 minutes at the end for questions and answers and community engagement. So Graham, over to you.
Thank you, Keith. I will try and be brief. First of all, apologies that I couldn't be there in person. I've got a pretty small kid at home and have been traveling a bunch, and turns out that generates some difficulties sometimes. And really appreciate being able to participate in this panel. I'd like to share here a bit today on some of the work that we've been doing to try and disrupt online harms and what we've learned in that process, and how we think that can contribute to further work within this community. So first, a little bit about the NetBeacon Institute. It was created by Public Interest Registry in 2021. PIR is the operator of the .org TLD and is a not-for-profit and needs to do good works in service of that not-for-profit mission, and really felt like there was a gap within the ecosystem around issues of DNS abuse, that there wasn't someone in the middle of that focused on this issue, working across the community within ICANN and outwards to try and educate, collaborate, build tools and resources to try and disrupt DNS abuse. And so the Institute was created to try and fulfill that need. We're not commercial as a part of the not-for-profit. I'll talk a little bit about the services that we offer, but we don't do anything for fee or cost recovery. All of what we do is free. And so as we began this work with the mission of trying to make the internet safer for everybody, we first needed to understand the landscape of DNS abuse. And so we created a project called NetBeacon Map, Measurement and Analytics Platform, which is a free and transparent, academically robust attempt to measure the prevalence of DNS abuse across the ecosystem, as well as things like concentration, mitigation rates, and median time to mitigation. And we do all of that work in partnership with core labs out of the University of Grenoble, an academic there named Professor Maciej Korczynski. And so we've been providing this data publicly to the ecosystem for 3 years. Lost some sense of time being stuck in this room. And really trying to enable the multi-stakeholder community to try and do data-driven policy discussion and development, as well as really drive industry action based on rigorous data. And so what have we learned from that? Well, a couple things. One is 95% of the malicious domains that we see belong to about 50 registrars or less. 80% belongs to less than 20. And so on a malicious domain front, in a way, that's good news. The problem space is not huge. There's differences between the registrars and TLDs also, in that data. But we can sort of wrap our collective arms around the scope of that problem. There are changes that we can make. There's ways that we can bring all of these parties together and improve the situation. We can see now the changes within the industry based on the ICANN contract amendments that came into effect last year, where we begin to see the larger, more active players get incrementally better, but they're close to diminishing returns, I think, on issues of DNS abuse for the sort of large, more engaged registrars in the space. And we can see abuse concentrating now in a smaller number of more highly abused registrars and TLDs. Right now, we see a really acute issue with 2 registrars with very large abusive campaigns happening. And we'll publish some more information about that in the next few weeks. But all of that has begun to influence how we begin to approach this problem and think about it. And that really led us to how can we begin to disrupt these things? And so we built NetBeacon Reporter, which is a conduit for abuse reporting that anyone can use via web form or API and use it to submit abuse reports to any GTLD registrar or participating CCTLD or registry, as well as we distribute to hosting companies and CDNs. So what we're trying to do is take abuse reports in, we standardize them, we enrich them, we make them better, we reduce the technical burden on the reporter, and we distribute those abuse reports to multiple layers of the internet stack to try and disrupt those harms. That work was directly responsive to some multi-stakeholder outputs, SSR2 and SEC115, if you speak ICANN, most specifically. And so we've been running that now since 2022. and doing somewhere around the realm of about 20,000 abuse reports a month. And we learn an awful lot from that sort of volume. We're getting a lot of feedback from the hosts and registrars that we're reporting to on the quality of those abuse reports. And we can see who's taking action when and why. And going back to some of the points made by the other panelists, especially around immediacy, thank you, Lucien, for that. Boy, it seems very clear that improving reactive processes around abuse, there's still some room there. We can do better at evidence gathering, and we can do better at getting abuse reports to registries, registrars, and hosts in a timely fashion, and we can get better at helping them respond quicker. And all of those, I think, are interconnected. Lastly, it seems really clear that we need improved, reliable, and accessible proactive processes. You know, abuse is happening at such a scale that trying to react all the time isn't sufficient. You know, there are days where we have sent 6,000 abuse reports out, 7,000 abuse reports out to individual registries or registrars, and that just doesn't work. It just doesn't scale that way without some form of automation, but really it's about getting in front. And so how do we think collectively about getting in front of some of these issues? And lastly, a point I want to make about trust and users is that I think we can rely a little bit on trust based on behavior within these systems rather than identity. Because behavior on that platform, how many domains have you registered, how old is your hosting account, those attributes can't be faked and feel like a really good place to begin building trust on as we begin to think about who has access to these tools and resources. I'll stop there. I know we only have a few minutes. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Graham. Really appreciate it. We have like 3 minutes left, so I've got 2 people at the microphone. If we could be brief. Oh, and I'm sorry, we have 3. Yes. So let's try to fit in at least the 3 interventions. So go right ahead. Thank you so much.
Ok, bonjour, merci pour ces belles interventions. Mon nom est Assouyou, je viens du Sénégal. J'apprécie beaucoup la thématique, surtout l'identité numérique, le DNS. Le Sénégal dispose depuis les années 80 d'un DNS, mais en 2025, certaines institutions étatiques envoient des mails, non pas avec le point SN, mais avec un Yahoo ou un Gmail. Ce qui constitue même un risque, puisque la question de la cybersécurité y pose. Et récemment, l'État du Sénégal a été victime à 2 reprises de cyberattaques. Alors, en tant qu'expert, que proposerez-vous à l'État pour qu'on puisse utiliser dans les services administratifs le point SN, afin qu'il y ait une identité numérique, mais aussi afin de renforcer la sécurité. Voilà.
Okay, thank you for the question. I know we have a couple of French speakers here on the panel. So, Benoit, can I turn to you?
I'll try to translate and make it short, thank you. The issue is that some governments and administration in Africa, for instance, they are victims from scam campaigns because they are also themselves sending emails from Gmail, Yahoo, whatever domain names, and not using their own ccTLD. And so what would be the solutions to tackle this kind of abuse and reinforce the use of local TLDs? I hope I translate correctly.
Thank you very much for the translation. So good question. Maybe we can take that offline since we have a couple of others in queue. So is that Andrew again?
It is. I'll be real quick. 2 very quick points. Firstly, ICANN have done some great work to tighten up the contracts to address some of the DNS abuse issues. The real gap here is the lack of action by some of the ccTLDs. So how do we get governments to also step forward to address this? So maybe this is the right fora for that, as some of them are here. And then secondly, despite the good work in ICANN, the definition of DNS abuse that ICANN uses is incredibly narrow, and, for example, doesn't address things like CSAM, although it does cover phishing. So how can we get more work done to broaden the definition so it has even more impact than it already has? Thanks.
So Thank you very much, Andrew. I can respond to that very briefly. As far as the definition of DNS abuse, one of the bright lines is when you get into content-related matters, ICANN's bylaws prohibit it from getting involved into content. So the definition of DNS abuse is relatively narrow by necessity of ICANN's bylaws. But there are other venues for discussing content-related harms that are sort of being discussed and developed. And Bertrand, I'm going to turn to you as the shepherd of the Internet Infrastructure Forum. That's one of the areas where some of these content-related discussions are going to take place. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. So in a nutshell, I'm Bertrand Lachapelle. I'm the Executive Director of the Internet and Jurisdiction Policy Network. As Keith mentioned, we have been asked to organize a space to address a certain number of the abuses that that cannot be addressed within the ICANN environment, and also to engage other actors than just the DNS operators. I want just to make, and this is the Internet Infrastructure Forum, which is a new thing that started basically in February this year. I want to very quickly mention, in light of what you've been saying, one, this whole thing is a speed and scale challenge, and it's a data challenge. It's a data sharing challenge. The second thing is that scams, frauds, and so on, there's a concept that is evolving that we've been discussing in the IIF, which is the notion of theft by deception. This is a category of problems that require or would really benefit from coordinated action by the different actors along the stack. The next thing is what I love about what has been presented here, what we do with the IIF, is that these are bottom-up, spontaneous self-organization, just like the ITF emerged, just like the other organizations emerged. This is multi-stakeholder, bottom-up initiatives in action. It actually is what is needed because the governments are hobbled by the jurisdictional challenges that prevent them from addressing cross-border issues. And the last thing is, what is really interesting is that we see the emergence, and Graham was here. Lucien, you're talking about what you're doing with the signal exchange. There are layers here. The IIF is a space for the discussion of what could be done by the different actors. We see the emergence of new intermediaries that handle the abuse workflow problem, management, and what you're doing is contributing to the platforms for exchanging signals. And I think this is building the ecosystem that at last will allow later on to engage law enforcement and other actors so that the whole number of actors can, in a networked fashion, address those abuses.
Thank you very much, Bertrand. And with that, we are 2+ minutes over time. So I think we probably need to move to wrap up. I just want to say thank you all very much. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to everybody online. Thanks to you in the room. And we look forward to carrying this on. I wish we had another hour, but we need to close the session. So thank you very much.